You've heard the stories. Naked warriors howling like wolves, eyes burning with madness, charging into battle without fear or armor. They were called berserkers. But were they real? The term berserker comes from Old Norse, likely berserker, meaning bear shirt, as in wearing a bear pelt. Others interpret it as bear shirt, suggesting they fought without armor. Both translations reflect the same brutal idea. These were not ordinary warriors. They were possessed. They appear in the Icelandic sagas, semi-historical, semi-mythical stories of Viking heroes. According to these tales, berserkers could not be harmed by iron or fire. They bit their shields. They roared. They felt no pain. They were Odin's chosen, his special forces on the battlefield. In Ynglinga Saga, Snorri Sturluson wrote that Odin's men went without armor and acted like mad dogs or wolves. They bit their shields, were strong as bears or bulls, and killed men with a single blow. This is one of the oldest written accounts from the 13th century describing berserker rage. But let's be clear, the sagas were written long after the Viking Age had ended. They're full of exaggeration, drama, and myth. So the big question is, were berserkers real people or just poetic creations? The line between Viking myth and Viking history is thin. Berserkers might have been a real cult of warriors, but we can't take the sagas literally. Still, multiple sources, not just sagas, mention berserkers. From poems and law codes to Christian chroniclers horrified by their savagery. In fact, berserkers were even outlawed in Norway by the year 1015. King Eric outlawed going berserk. Not just the people, but the state of frenzy itself. It was too violent, too chaotic, even for a warrior society like the Norse. So what was this so-called berserker gang, or berserker fury? Was it just psychological? Religious? Fueled by drugs or alcohol? Or was it something deeper? In Norse belief, warriors could shape-shift spiritually, if not physically. The bear and the wolf weren't just animals, they were totems of power. Berserkers took on that energy, fighting as if they became the beast. It wasn't just about killing. It was about becoming more than human, becoming myth. But belief is not the same as fact. And history is rarely kind to legends. Or was clear. They wanted to leave their human selves behind and become a vessel for something greater, animal, divine, or both. This is supported by numerous references to them wearing animal pelts, especially of bears or wolves. These weren't costumes. They were sacred garb, symbols of their spiritual identity. In fact, another group of warriors, the Ulfhednar, were said to channel wolves rather than bears. They fought in similar frenzy, believed to be Odin's chosen as well. Both berserkers and Ulfhednar likely had rituals before battle. These may have included fasting, chanting, dancing, or blood offerings. Their rituals were not unlike shamanic practices, an attempt to pierce the veil between the physical and spiritual world. This connection to shamanism may explain the reports of their superhuman feats and strange behavior. There's also a social explanation. In Viking society, reputation was everything. A man known for losing control in battle, feared by all, gained fame. That fame could translate to power, leadership, and honor. Becoming a berserker may have been as much about social strategy as religious fervor. By cultivating their fearsome image, these men carved out a unique status in a warrior-dominated world. Yet not everyone admired them. As Christianity spread across Scandinavia, berserkers became targets of reform. Their behavior was seen as pagan, chaotic, and unholy. Laws were introduced to punish those who went berserk. By the 12th century, they were no longer seen as elite warriors, but as outlaws, madmen, or worse. The age of the berserker was fading. But even as they disappeared, their legend grew. In sagas, they became monstrous. In poetry, they became symbols of rage. In folklore, they became cautionary tales. But at their core, they were men, flesh and blood, trying to transcend their limits. Berserker rage wasn't just about brute force. It was more than a method of fighting. It was a ritual, a transformation, and possibly even a form of worship. For the Norse, battle was never just physical. It was spiritual. To fight in the name of Odin was to surrender your body to something wild and divine. Berserkers may have believed they were not just warriors but chosen vessels for gods and beasts. In Norse mythology, Odin is not just the god of war. He is also the god of madness, poetry, and death. He seeks knowledge at any cost, even sacrificing his own eye. He is a wanderer, a shapeshifter, and a master of magic. The Berserkers' fury, the Berserker gang, can be seen as a gifter, a curse from Odin himself. It was said that Odin could give his warriors strength beyond normal men and shield them from pain or injury. But this power came at a price: loss of control, isolation, and eventual rejection by society. The Norse concept of hamrith, a shape or spirit of a person, may help explain the berserker state. According to this belief, the soul could shift or expand. A man could adopt the hamr of a bear or wolf and become that creature in spirit, if not in body. Some sagas even tell of men who physically took on the form of animals, though this was likely metaphorical. In reality, the berserker may have entered a trance-like state so deep that his very identity seemed to change. This ritualized transformation can be compared to shamanic practices seen in other cultures. Shamans often enter altered states through dancing, chanting, fasting, or consuming substances. In this state, they communicate with spirits or channel otherworldly power. Berserkers may have done something similar, not for healing or prophecy, but for war. The battle was their sacred space. The enemy was their offering. The frenzy was not random. It followed a pattern. First, the warrior became restless, trembling, even feverish. Then came the roaring, the biting of shields, the overwhelming desire to kill. Once the fury took hold, he would feel no pain, show no fear, and fight without hesitation. After the battle, however, he might collapse in weakness, exhaustion, or even guilt. Some sagas describe berserkers falling into a deep sleep after their rage passed, unable to move for hours or days. Collapse is familiar in modern psychology. It resembles certain dissociative states, adrenal overload, or even trauma responses. In that sense, Berserker gang might be seen as a weaponized form of extreme stress. But for the Norse, it was something far more mystical. The sacred aspect of the berserker also appears in their relationship with animals. Bears and wolves were more than symbols, they were spirits. A warrior who wore a bear pelt wasn't just dressing up, he was inviting the bear spirit into himself. The wolf, known for its wildness and loyalty to the pack, was equally sacred. In fact, the Ulfhead Nartha wolf warriors were often seen as even more mysterious than the berserkers. They may have been elite shock troops or religious cultists who lived on the edge of society. Animal symbolism ran deep in Norse culture. Ravens, wolves, and bears all appear in myths, often linked to gods. Odin himself is followed by two wolves, Geri and Friggi, and two ravens, Hugin and Munin. By taking on the traits of these creatures, the berserker aligned himself with divine forces. In doing so, he stepped outside normal human experience and paid the price. Society both admired and feared them. They were heroes in times of war, but dangerous in times of peace. Some legends tell of berserkers attacking friends or family during uncontrollable rages. Their fury could be seen as a blessing on the battlefield, but a curse at home. This duality, sacred and savages, what makes them so fascinating. As Christianity spread, this duality became intolerable. The berserkers' rage, once seen as holy, was now viewed as demonic. Their practices were outlawed, their symbols were erased. But their memory endured in stories, in whispers, and in fear. Centuries after their last roar echoed across the battlefield, berserkers remain a mystery. Were they mystical warriors who truly became beasts in battle? Or were they just men, using drugs, madness, or performance to strike fear into their enemies? Modern science has tried to uncover the truth behind the myth. Some researchers suggest that the berserker rage was induced by substances, hallucinogens, alcohol, or herbal mixtures. The most frequently mentioned theory is the use of Amanita muscaria, the red-capped mushroom with white spots. It's known for its psychoactive properties and has been used by shamans in Siberia. Taken in the right amount, it can produce delirium, aggression, and numbness to pain. But taken in the wrong amount, it can cause sickness or death. There is, however, no direct archaeological evidence of this mushroom being used by Norse warriors. Another theory points to alcohol. A strong brew consumed before battle could help numb pain and reduce fear. Combined with chanting, drumming, and group rituals, it might have created a frenzy. But alcohol also dulls reflexes. Berserkers were said to fight with incredible speed and strength. Some scholars argue that the berserker gang was a form of psychological conditioning. Repeated exposure to violence, combined with specific breathing techniques and extreme physical training, may have allowed warriors to enter dissociative states. These states, similar to what some soldiers experience in modern combat, can dull pain, block emotion, and create tunnel vision. In this sense, berserker rage wasn't mystical, it was a primitive form of psychological warfare. Others believe the berserkers were simply acting. A terrifying reputation was a weapon in itself. If your enemies feared you before the first sword swing, you had already won half the battle. Shield biting, roaring, and fighting half naked may have been a strategy to intimidate and shock. In a society built on honor and story, looking like a monster was just as valuable as fighting like one. But even if berserkers were just men, that doesn't make their story any less powerful. The human brain is capable of astonishing feats under stress. Adrenaline can boost strength and dull pain. The mind can be trained to overcome fear. Berserkers may have tapped into these instincts more deeply than anyone else. Archaeology offers few clear answers. Some graves believed to belong to elite warriors have been found with bear or wolf remains, possibly representing totem animals. But there's no definitive way to say, this was a berserker. The Norse left behind sagas, not documentaries. What survives is layered in symbolism, myth, and exaggeration. Berserkers were part of a warrior culture that valued bravery, strength, and fearlessness above all else. Whether they truly transformed into beasts, or simply believed they did, they crossed a line that most humans never would. They turned the battlefield into a sacred space. They made their own bodies into weapons of terror and legend. Today, the word berserk has become a synonym for wild rage. But in the old Norse world, it meant more. It meant sacrifice. It meant madness. It meant power, born of belief. So were berserkers real? Yes and no. They were real men, shaped by brutal times and wild lands. But they were also part of something larger, a mythology built on extremes, where gods walked among men and warriors could become monsters. Berserkers stood at the edge of that world, howling into the storm. And even now, centuries later, we still hear the echoes.